Yeah, greetings out there, citizens of the Southern Sun. I am here in North Dakota with Punch Rockroyd.
Hi, thanks for having me, Slab McLarge. That's not right. Slab Bulkhead, I'm pretty sure, but well.
Yeah, but this is Taylor Booty, who has
Hello.
been on the show before. Taylor, you are offering another Zoom class.
I am, yes, starting Saturday the 21st and Sunday the 22nd.
Of July.
Of of June.
Of June.
Yeah,
Oh,
of
okay.
June
It's
this
actually sooner
month.
than
So
that.
it's about a
Okay.
week away. Except this summer it's going to be Sagas, an introduction to the Sagas course.
All right. What all are you going to read?
Depends. We have access, so if you join the course, you have access to just about every saga I will provide you that has been translated into English. We will open up with the first week is going to be background on the sagas, just sort of some, historical background of the sagas, information about them, scholarship. What do we think about sagas as a whole? To orient someone who's never maybe read the sagas before.
Okay.
And then we will follow that up with Phrase Godi,
Okay.
because
It's kind of a favorite. Nice short.
it's good, it's short, it also has a lot. Like thematically, there's a lot in it, right? I think it's a good opening one. And then from there, it's going to be up to the students, I think.
Okay, that's cool.
I have a few different ways of organizing it, whether that's, we could talk about outlawry.
Mhm.
Like the theme of outlawry, there's a couple of different sagas and different parts of sagas that cover that, so we focus on that. Do we want to talk about the pre-Christian religion, supernatural events, notions of honor, right, dueling,
Zombies.
zombies, monsters? But I kind of want to leave that up to what the class does this year too, because last year I had I had everything planned out where we went week by week. We covered a god and then sort of had a theme tied with it.
Mhm.
But because the sagas are so, some of them are a lot longer than poems from the Poetic Edda, and a lot of that. I want to be flexible and also, as part of the course, let people not vote, but also kind of help guide. Do we want to read all of Njál Saga, for example?
Yeah,
So
sure.
pretty long, right? Saga of People of Laxardal, also somewhat longer, where I have material. I'm content to teach the whole thing if we want to kind of go through there and pick out thematic elements within one, or if we want to, take this section, right, as covered in comparison to other sagas too, and move that way.
That's cool. So, you're kind of given the option of, like, what are you interested in? How can I be a resource to you?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll present, like, options for this, right? Where I think right now I have two outlines. One that is thematic in the sense of, like, okay, we talk about, like, kingship and then outlawry, pre-Christian religion, like, by theme. And then I have another one that's more by genre, where it's we call them the more, I don't know, like, not historical sagas isn't quite right? But things from out of the Saga of Icelanders. We can cover the Fornalda Saga, right? The legendary sagas. Go into even some of the it's chivalric ones, the ones that are just rewrites of European courtly romances.
The Riddarasögur.
Yeah.
Although some of those are original.
Yeah. Like,
which are get hilarious, Sir Thorstein or whatever.
Right.
I have slightly a soft spot for those. Okay, so you're talking about just any genre, not just Icelandic sagas, because actually most saga classes are, like, restricted to Icelandic sagas.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sagas covers more than that, though. Right. I know traditionally, like, CU Boulder. Yes, it is. When I've TA'd for the course there, when we've taught it, like, the focus of these classes tend to be Icelandic sagas, which is not inappropriate and is frequently a good idea. But based on what I've heard and some feedback from last year, I encourage people who know nothing about sagas to take it, right? Like, I think this would be a good class for them too. But if you do know about sagas, you have read some of them, this is an opportunity maybe to read some of the less known ones if we want to.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of value in, if you're interested in this culture, no matter what saga it is, even if you've read it many times, you're always going to find something else. Right? I mean, personally, for me, for a lot of the sagas, I had to read them half a dozen times before I remembered them.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't think there's any, if you've read some sagas before, don't feel like this is going to be beneath you, right? This is actually going to be good, a good refresher for you. And I think that going beyond just the sagas of Icelanders, potentially at least, is great because we often act like, there's kind of this 19th century notion that the sagas of Icelanders are like the fine ones.
Yeah, right. The canonical ones.
Yeah, but they're all from the same culture.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's like, I used to tell students, maybe in a class that you TA'd for at CU, it's like you're browsing the TV and you get all these different channels, right? You have the action Western channel, with the John Wayne movies, that's the Sagas of Icelanders. You get the 50s sword and dragon movies, and that's the Fornaldur Saga. You get you get CNN, and that's the Samtíðar Saga. So you get, but it's all kind of made by the same people, and I think that's something that we tend to forget. It's like people, just like people today, can have a taste for all kinds of different genres, right? I mean, we just watched Space Mutiny again, right? And then you might go home and
we call it space opera. It's not. Adventure's not right. Right. Science fiction also seems. We stretch.
Science seems strong.
Fiction,
yes.
Fiction, absolutely.
But you could turn around and watch, the giant one or Birdemic or something, right?
Yeah.
Or you could even watch something good. Lawrence of Arabia, maybe.
Yeah, why not?
But you can have, one person can have a taste for multiple different types of literature, and one culture can certainly have taste.
Oh, absolutely.
For multiple types. And I think that we forget that those all reflect one place and time, because they are all largely written within, a century and a half window.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge span of time, right? Which when we covered, Old Norse mythology, yes, we have that span of time, but we can also talk about Tacitus, right? Like someone like this, and how this brings that in, which is not impossible to do for something like Saga of the Volsungs, right? Which is, we have these older material and whatever, but it's there too. It's a good segue too, because the course, like last year, as I'll mention, is 12 weeks. So it's a planned 12 weeks, and that's one option to buy in, which is the standard, I'll say university level course, right? There's also an option to buy into a 16-week version of the class, where the last 4 weeks are entirely determined by the students, which
I thought that was a nice idea that you did.
It worked out great last year. We ended up talking, one of the weeks was on, the influence of Old Norse mythology on contemporary, fantasy, the fantasy genre, contemporary media, things like that. One of the weeks, the class decided they wanted a sort of a history of the scholarship on Old Norse mythology, which was a lot of fun. We were talking about Deutsche Mythologie by Brothers Grimm, right? And we got to talk about prop, some of the other Jan de Vries, right? What were the different ways, I guess, large modes of analyzing Old Norse mythology was something everyone was interested in. It kind of got brought up in the course, but
I have my favorites from back then,
but that not something I would have expected to be talking about, but the class.
But you go where people are interested, and that's great, right? You're adaptable to the needs of your students.
Yeah, exactly.
Which you want to be. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think the last one was a lot of fun too. I think I've had a lot of people from that class last year re-sign up for this one.
Cool.
I'm still in contact regularly with some of the people from the class too, which has been great. I think it was a super cool experience for me being able to teach. I appreciate being able to teach in that way to an invested audience, an audience that is, or to a group of people who care about the material, personally, right? Or like in a way that it's less, I'm taking this class to fulfill my historical perspectives requirement and maybe don't.
This is imposed on me.
Yeah. And it's all low stakes. There's no homework. If you don't, I mean, the flexibility of it too, it's like when we do get to something like Norse Saga, okay, how do we want to divide that text? We want to read the whole thing, not like what's a good amount of reading. And if you don't get it done, it's still not, it's not the end of the world, right? You can still come in, the classes are or one of the Sunday classes will be recorded. And you can always go back when you reread it, kind of have this thing to it. You will also be given access to frankly unconscionable amount of reading material. I will provide PDFs. I provide all of the sagas as that we might be reading, as well as just a bunch of academic articles, anything. If I've had students who reached out to me last year who asked like, hey, I found this in a footnote, can you get it? Like, or can you help me find how to get that? And I was able to do that. Nice. So we have.
There's so much of that stuff is so gatekept, or it's just gatekept by the fact people don't know where to look. Right? I mean,
I've struggled to find some. I mean, some of these things are, yes, not easy. I am very fortunate that I have access to a university library and a key that lets me, see some of these journals from 1986 or whatever that was talking about.
Yeah, and there's always thing. Actually, that's you almost hit the nail on the head of like when it's hard to find things from. Because the last few years, people are putting this stuff in academia.edu.
Yep.
And if it's more than 100 years old, it's public domain. It's that stuff between the 1920s and like 2010 that's hard to find. Yeah.
Right. So and I when I can and anything I'm teaching from, or I mean, as much as I feel like my own expertise in the material, I also rely on a lot of this material as well. And if I'm presenting it in that way, I try to be as honest and open about, this is Anatoly Lieberman's made this argument about berserkers or something, right? And I want to have that, like an art, like something he's written, right, to show them that it's like this is exactly what he said. So I'm not necessarily misrepresenting what he said,
right? But
also, it's not just this is a real heavy hitter, let's say, of the material saying something like this, but people who disagree with him too, right? That it's not. I do try to provide as many sort of different examples of here's one person's approach who took a more maybe like structuralist Jungian psychoanalytic way to it, and here's someone who was more interested in maybe the folkloristics of like the oral tradition background and like a folklore sort of angle on something.
And you can even do that with looking at different translations too, if that's something that interests people, right? Like what are these two translators doing differently? Can be a pretty interesting question.
Yeah, and we did that with last year, right? When we went into we used your translation of the Poetic Edda primarily, but when I had a question or a student had a question, frequently I'd grab Carolyn Larington's.
Yeah, sure.
Right, and we'd go and find this. We'd take a look at the stanzas. I mean, sometimes they even broken up differently, right?
Yeah,
too, and
that's right. Because nobody can agree about that.
And that led to some really interesting discussions, right? Not just about, what is this saying or what should we get from it, but also how do we receive it, and what does that change in the sense of, like, you and the translations could be the same, quote unquote, right? But different, right? Like how it's presented.
Some difference of emphasis. There's more words here, fewer words here.
Right.
Are you trying to maintain some aesthetic similarity to the original that maybe distorts the meaning in the present?
Or makes it hard, right? Yeah. I want to keep this poetic meter, and this is discussions about problems of translation, right? Which is always in. I think a discussion in these classes. How do we take this material? Not very many people read Old Norse. They can go to you for that, right?
Although there's more of them than you think. Yes,
there are more who are able to take that material. I do not read Old Norse or Old Icelandic, so I do rely on translations, and those are things I frequently I think about, right, when I'm even before teaching, when I'm reading the Poetic Edda and I have yours, I'll also read Larington's next to it, right? Just to have a better sense of like, okay, this is what different approaches and things can lead to the material, which is good.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, and sometimes people hear me maybe say like absolutely and think, well, that's disingenuous, but in fact, Carolyn is a wonderful lady, a wonderful colleague, and just a really, really kind person.
That's someone. That's a Carolyn Larington, rare Carolyn Larington hater over there.
There aren't many. No, she's
kind of impossible from what I understand about it, right?
She was on the channel once.
Yeah.
But we have different translation approaches, and we know different things, right? And we have sort of different. Yeah, we have pretty different audiences. I think is also part of it. So I think there's a lot of value in saying, well, there's two people who, I'm going to be gracious to myself and say two people who know what they're doing. But they're two different people, so what are they saying that's different? And now there'll be the second edition of the Poetic Edda.
Yeah, exactly. Which
which you'll be
looking forward to.
Once again under David Ryder name. So.
Yeah, I mean, even like thinking in that context too, right? Like even this, some of these courses we get to like the presentate, like who is the intended audience of different translations is even different, right? Because I imagine. Even like if you were translating, a couple stanzas of Havamal, but you knew it was for a specialist, like old. These are people who all read Old Norse, right? You knew
different thing
yesterday.
Then
right?
I'm trying to show you. Yes, I know what this says.
I know exactly what this means, right?
Right.
So there's different, like, okay, a translation for a general reading audience, right? Like non-specialists. People who are interested in the material but don't have a background. You have different ones that are...
And you see this with Saga translations too, although it's less of a problem often because it's in prose, so you don't have as much like deliberate obfuscation. But one thing that's interesting that came to my mind in terms of a special topic you look at, if people get curious about it, is the difference between what it says in the prose and the poetry in a saga, because a lot of them include tons of poetry, right?
Right, yeah.
And then there's some really interesting stuff there where... you can date often that poetry, and so for example, Gisli Saga, one of these typical Icelandic sagas written in the 1200s, solid story. The poetry actually does date to about the time it's talking about 300 years earlier.
Exactly.
So what is that, right? Was this story being passed down partially or entirely in poetry?
And then prosified by a later, right? Or is this? I mean, so like, is the poem original to the story, like, right, in a way, or how does this?
Was this composed by a guy who was in roughly the same position as the guy in the saga?
Yeah.
This is composed by somebody totally different, but actually about that time.
Yeah.
Like that's like Agel's the same way. Agel's poems are actually they date to
significantly older, right? Yeah. Like contemporaneous to how Agel is presented in the saga, as opposed to the language of the prose around it, obviously.
Yeah. Like, I think that kind of thing is super interesting because it's sort of unanswerable, right? The only testament to it is that it's written down, but then what is the story behind how that got written down?
Exactly.
That's super interesting to me.
And it leads to, not to retread old ground here, right? But those different approaches, right? Like, okay, how do you, the history of scholarship on sagas being, are these like pure artifacts of like historical truth, right? Which was something that was, for like at some point fairly accepted before being challenged. But then how hard do you swing the other way, where you would people who argue that it's a pure literary genre, and we take nothing from it that's historical, and then you might have folklorists who come in and identify something like that. Or like, well, no, this poem in it is, Agel could have said, like a historical figure of Agel could have said this, right? The language is the same for it. So whoever that is, the composer of it is contemporaneous with when Agel is running around, being a hero in quotes, I guess, for it.
Yeah, I like Agel's Saga, but it's one of those cases where, some people can't watch a movie that has a flawed hero.
Yes.
It's like, how am I supposed to identify with this guy? Well, you can just take it as a story. And I mean, if you just take Agel Saga as a story, it's a pretty interesting story without being like, I endorse this man.
Right, yeah. Like you can, right? I enjoy this is, what today we call, even that tension, right? Like someone we look at as being like, Agel being, okay, I think fair if you met someone like that today, you'd be like, this guy's kind of an asshole, right?
Yeah.
Is that the same? Would the composer, like, or if Agel is this sort of extant older figure to himself, would the composer have thought that? Did the writer think that later, right? Are you trying to present, and then what does that mean presenting it in this way, right? Because even with Craven Freyr's Godi, right, he renounces Freyr, famously, then becomes like an atheist, basically. Like, he renounces religion in a very
he becomes a TV tropes flat Earth atheist.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But that's okay. Is that something that the writer is, talking about this in order to sort of?
Is he a proto-Christian? Is that really what it is?
Justifying like the sort of pre-Christian religion, and that the good people, eventually figured out that this wasn't the right way to go, or have this, or was it something like? Is it again? Can we take this as? Oh no, this person did do this type of thing. So,
I mean, I think that Sigurður Nordal's study on Norse Saga in somewhere around 1950.
Yeah, I think
was pretty decisive in saying, actually, it turns out nobody in Norse Saga is real.
Right. Yeah.
Which is kind of amazing because it's so richly drawn. It's memorable. It's realistic, right? I mean, and all the places you can go to all these places, right? You can go to like rocks that are mentioned in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what's fascinating about the sagas of Icelanders as a genre, is that they're written by people who just have imbibed this environment so well,
right,
that they can tell a story that's just absolutely richly painted. Like it might as well just be a movie set there. Right? Yeah. And it was, in one case, I mean, Gisli Saga got made as a movie in the 1980s, Outlaw, and they filmed it pretty close, I think, to where the saga was.
But think of something like, so Gisling's like, potential topic for if you take the 16-week course, like, right? That's just a Western.
Yeah.
In a way, right? Like,
you're right.
We think about contemporary,
even with the sense of humor, actually. Yeah,
very. I know, Tombstone, right? You had your video not long ago about that, talking about Tombstone. But a lot of the sagas, to me, reading them, it could be from my own educational background, right? There's something very akin to like the Western genre, like this frontier sort of one, but also people that live there. Can be very romanticized, and other times very stark, maybe is the way to put it. I
think that there's actually more to Sturlunga Saga, the contemporary annals from the 1100s, 1200s, than a lot of people want to give them credit for. It's a grisly story because they're writing about things that are actually happening around them. Yeah. So the combat tends to not be very clean. It tends to be pretty ugly and mean. But there's some really interesting personalities that come in there. And there's actually a modern Icelandic writer, Einar Kárason, who has repurposed those, I think just in Icelandic. I don't think it's ever been translated. But he's done a really good job with sort of rewriting them as modern novels. Yeah. Which has been kind of cool.
I mean, a testament to the quality of, I think, a lot of these sagas, right? As a genre, there's, whether you agree with the approach or not, like as literature, like real significant, like Njal Saga, as long as it is, the characterization, like Egil Saga, sometimes like characters, true or not, right? Like these are proto-novel, like even arguably novels in a way, right?
And, there's no virtue, I think, that you can find in these stories that you can't find in a modern novel, and there's no flaw. Yeah. Right? I mean, you can complain about things about them. There's too many names. Well, there's too many names in War and Peace. Right? They get bogged down in legal things. Well, let me point you to any number.
Oh my God! Sellers, right? Let's go to the thing. Okay, who's related to whom here, right? And who's backing whom, and in what way?
Plenty of stories are hard to follow that way in modern times too. I mean, especially if you look at 19th century novels, they can really be like that. Yeah. But people say, "Oh, there's too many names." There's too many names of the Silmarillion, right? So it's.
Right. I think if you can handle, and think of the Game of Thrones series, right? Like that set of book, right? Where it's
never read it, never seen it, so I don't know. But that's probably a good comparison.
But no, it's like same, like a ton of different characters. Sometimes like details on things. You pay attention to a lot of different things. political machinations, whatever. I think if you like that, or you can handle something like that, the sagas aren't any
No.
more or less difficult than something like that.
I think that what happens is we have kind of a reflex to say, well, this is really unfamiliar looking on the surface because the names are so unfamiliar.
Yeah.
And I think once you get past that, it's very, very approachable literature. Yeah. And some of these stories I think are as readable as anything published recently, right? Yeah. I think, I put Gisli Saga way up there. I put Gunnlaug Saga way up there. I put, Njal Saga is up there in its moments.
It's the canonical one, I guess. Yeah, it's certainly not my favorite, but I think it is the one that has been very much identified in a way as like a canonical saga, I guess.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's 6 stories in one. And
right.
My favorite is probably the ending part of it. I just like Corey and all of his what's the comic book name? Blóðregan.
Oh, yeah. Are the names harder in Icelandic sagas, do you think? I wonder if there's something to, because like the patronym, matronym sort of thing, to me has always made them almost easier to identify, right? It's like, you're the son of this person who I remember, right? Which can be, stylistically difficult, but, drawing out family trees become much easier when your name identifies a specific sort of...
Yeah, and most of these books have family trees in them, And if you have 2 people of the same name, well...
Right. All right, sorry here. Okay. Making sure it was not an emergency call, everyone. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Got all kinds of stuff going on here.
Yeah.
But
here in North Dakota.
Here in North Dakota. Tendoka. Yeah, well, where can people find more information? I'll put a link on the screen. And
so the course is being run through Eventbrite again, listed there. If anyone has more questions about, how does it work, the timing, how the recordings work, even if you have questions about the costs, you can't do one upfront payment, but you think you might be able to do like 2 or 3 in some way. I'm happy to work out with things like that. The easiest way would be to email weirdwildhunt@gmail.com.
All right.
Or if you're on the unofficial Dr. Jackson Crawford Discord.
Unofficial.
The unofficial official Jackson Crawford Discord, I am also on there. I think my name is Ask Me About Monster Theory. You can just send me okay. You can ask me about monster theory, or you can ask me about the course I'm teaching.
Cool.
And that is, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to give. I have a document of what previous students have said about the course that were very nice. That they did for me. So I can I can ask someone to put you in touch with them too to see if does this guy really know what he's talking about? I don't,
I think you do. And, a lot of my patrons and people who have taken my Zoom classes have taken yours and have commented. And, people always ask me, when is the next one?
Yeah. I'm happy. This did take longer than I anticipated to get going. I'd love to have more students, too, for it. I think it's 7 p.m. MST Saturday evenings, and then 11 a.m. on Sundays.
Same content on Saturday and
Same content. The Sunday one will be recorded, and then all of those recordings will be made available in perpetuity to the students, as long as I have the storage space to pay for them.
Nice.
Which I've discovered is videos, it turns out, take up a lot of space on free storage things. So as long as but if I ever had to get rid of something, I'd let people know well in advance. Like, hey, I need to clear some things up. This is maybe if in the future I have class from 2-3 years ago. I'd say like, hey, I need to make some room. I'm going to get rid of these. So if you want them, download them by this point. But as far as I'm concerned now, you take the class, you have access to all of the materials that I give you as long as you want them. You'll have access to the videos as long as you want them. You can, if I run the course again and you want to hop on, say hi, or rejoin it again, I think that's fine too. I'd like it to be kind of a permanent license for the course and the material.
That's how I do them too. The way I see it, you pay me for the information, not for the particular chunk of time.
Yeah, right. Too, and it was I have a lot of fun with it. I don't know how you feel yours. It was an interesting challenge in certain ways, but also like a super great experience to be able to have a conversation about the material as opposed to sort of just reciting necessarily.
Yep. I've had great students in these, and in fact, the students in my version of the myth class were pretty different than yours, where like mine is like, let's spend 20 minutes looking at this stanza.
Yes, exactly. In Old Norse.
In Old Norse, yeah. But like as niche as that interest was and is, the people who have come into that, I mean, have been actually very influential in shaping the second edition of the Poetic Edda.
Yeah, I think
so. There's a cycle here between
coming back. Yeah. Right. I mean, maybe the best endorsement I could probably offer is you did not fire me as your TA. I was not. I was competent enough.
More than that, I insisted on you as my TA. So,
well, there issue.
Like I'm pretty sure there was a time I had to kind of like really insist on you as my TA.
Like I need
he's done this. He knows this.
I need Taylor. Like why?
Why do I
please don't make me teach someone.
Yeah, it's like I don't need to teach somebody else this. He's right here. Don't make him teach German 1. Wow. Anyway, well, cool. Like I said, I'll put the link up on the video and then a pinned comment and direct people your way.
Yeah. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for more
my God.
Jackson Crawford content from beautiful North Dakota.
That's right. Yeah, mash that like subscribe button. All right, folks. All the best.
All the best. Thank you.
North Dakota.